Today's reading comes from Acts, and it's the account of the martyrdom of Stephen, the first Christian martyr. So today I would like to take an opportunity to think about martyrdom. For those of us who live in the safe parts of the world, we often think of martyrdom as something that took place long ago. It was part of the experience of the early church. Maybe we're aware of the many martyrs during the Reformation era, and maybe we're aware of those who left their home in the 19th century to spread the gospel, who paid the ultimate price. But the sad truth is, the 20th century was the bloodiest century for the church. More people were martyred in the 20th century than in other century in history. And the way things are going, the 21st century could be even bloodier. The 20th century started with the mass martyrdom of the Armenian people in the Ottoman Empire, followed by the deaths of Christians in China and the deaths of many Christians in the Holocaust. It ended with the mass martyrdom of the people of South Sudan. So today I would like to look at some 20th century martyrs. The ones we're going to look at today, their lives are marked and remembered over the west door of Westminster Abbey in London. In 2006, in order to honour those who had died in this bloody century, they erected a series of statues to those who had died as martyrs in the 20th century. These martyrs covered every continent. They covered both rich and poor, well-known and unknown, and from different Christian traditions. Today I've chosen 5. The format I will use is I will give you a short background to their lives and how they came to be martyred. It'll be followed by a series of quotes, either from the martyrs themselves if they were well known enough to have their quotes remembered, or from the scriptures. And we'll end with a collect of the day. Monche Masemola. Monche was born in a small village in South Africa. She grew up with her parents, 2 older brothers, a sister and a cousin. Although the area had been evangelized for decades, her family had resisted and continued to adhere to their traditional African religion. In 1919, the Community of the Resurrection from Murfield established a mission, and Father Augustine Mokea met Monche and invited her to a baptism class. She began to attend with her cousin Lucia, but her parents objected. At first they took her to a traditional healer who gave her drugs because he thought she was bewitched. She refused to take the medicine, and her parents beat her to make her take it. It continued to deteriorate, so her mother eventually took the girl's clothes so she could not attend church or her baptism classes. On February 4th, 1928, her parents took her to a lonely place where they killed her, burying her by a granite rock in the remote hillside. Monche said she would be baptized in her own blood, and she died without being baptized. Later, her mother did convert to Christianity and was baptized 40 years later in 1969. Monche was declared a martyr of the Church of the Province of South Africa in less than 10 years. Lucian Tapatide from Papua New Guinea. Lucian was born about 1921. He attended mission schools and was influenced by a devout Christian schoolteacher and the local Papuan priest. In 1939, he entered St. Aidan's Teaching College in Doranga and became a teacher in Sangara. On the 4th of January 1942, the Japanese invaded Papua New Guinea. The Anglican Bishop of New Guinea, Philip Strong, instructed the Anglican missionaries to remain at their posts. Lucien and 10 others, to evade the Japanese, came to a village, and there they found themselves escorted away by the men of the village. As they left the village, a man axed Lucien to death. The remainder of the group soon perished, beheaded by the Japanese. Later on, the man who killed him became a Christian and built a church in his name. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer is one of the greatest theologians of the 20th century. In 1909, he was born into an academically and socially well-connected family in Berlin. He chose to make his life as an academic and Lutheran pastor. When Hitler came to power, he quickly recognized how he opposed the gospel, and with others left the official Lutheran church and became Nazified and created something called the Confessing Church. Before the war broke out, Luther was traveling through the United States and Britain. In fact, he was in Yorkshire at the Communion of the Resurrection as war was developing in 1939. At that point, he was offered a position at Leeds University as a lecturer, but he chose instead to return to Germany because he felt it was his place to be with his people and to proclaim the gospel in the place God had called him to. It's not surprising his most famous book is called The Cost of Discipleship. He continued his opposition to Hitler and was eventually arrested. His letters and diaries from prison make one of the greatest theological witnesses of an academic trying to make sense of the faith in the most difficult place in the 20th century. He was eventually moved to a concentration camp, and as the Allies drew close, he was one of those chosen to be executed, so he would not survive the war. Ethel John was born in India in 1929 to a Muslim family. After partition, her family moved to Pakistan. At 17, she began to attend a Christian school and was so inspired by the book of Isaiah, she became a Christian secretly. After her parents moved to Pakistan, she continued to read the Bible secretly. But eventually, fearing a Muslim marriage, she ran away and took the name Ethel John and began to work in an orphanage. Her family pressed her to return, but she moved to Punjab and began to work in a mission hospital. She studied nursing and became a missionary. She would bicycle between the various villages, teaching women to read and working with them in the cotton field and caring for their needs. But there was still serious tension with her family. On February 2, 1960, she was found brutally murdered in her bed. She was remembered with devotion by the Christian community with whom she lived and worked. Oscar Romero. Romero was born into a working-class family in El Salvador in 1917. His father was a carpenter. He had 3 years of formal education before schooling ended, but after that he was privately tutored by a local teacher. At the age of 13, he was offered himself for ordination and was sent to a minor seminary in El Salvador and later to Rome to study theology and for the priesthood. In his time in Rome, he was seen as academically brilliant and was seen to have a good career within the church. After ordination, he was sent back home to El Salvador, where he had a career that was very much part of the establishment of the Catholic Church and was seen to be a conservative member of that church. He was eventually made bishop. When he came to his diocese, which was in a poor region of El Salvador, many of the priests in his diocese worried that he was in a poor appointment because of his reputation of being a member of the elite and concerned with the elite and very conservative. This was a period when El Salvador was being torn apart by civil war, as various groups tried to overthrow the government that was supported by the wealthy, and the government responded with torture, massacres, and massive human rights violations. In 1977, something happened that radically changed Romero's understanding. A good friend of his, a Jesuit priest, Romualdo Grande, was killed by the government. This woke Romero up to what was happening in his society. He began to speak clearly and powerfully against the government and its actions. Both on radio and in writing, he reported massacres, human rights violations, tortures, and disappearances. In his sermons, he called the people of El Salvador to stand by the poor, to stand for human rights, and to stand for justice. On March 24, 1980, he had a powerful sermon in which he called for soldiers to follow God and to disobey the orders where they are called upon to oppress and violate human rights. They were called to be Christians, not agents of the state. Later that night, he went to a small chapel to celebrate Mass. As he came to the altar, a man stood up and shot him twice and killed him. Since then, it has been identified that that man was connected with one of the right-wing parties, and its leader almost certainly ordered his death. In 2018, the church recognized Oscar Romero as a saint.